Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's episode, I want to dive into the complex and very intriguing world of our community, and specifically one fetish that I see many partake in. There's a lot of questions that surround it inside of the world of BDSM, one that I've been involved with throughout my 25 years inside of the lifestyle community. I want to focus today and talk about the psychological dynamics of humiliation play. I really want to start talking about the nuance aspects of this fetish. I'm definitely going to go over consent about this again today, something that I talk about quite often, and even get into some of the points of emotional well-being that surround this. So first, I think we need to kind of understand a little bit more for some of you who may or may not have been ever involved inside of this fetish of humiliation play. So humiliation play inside of the BDSM context involves the consensual act that invoke feelings of embarrassment or shame or degradation from one person to another, from the top to the bottom or the dominant to the submissive. In the realm of where power dynamics intersect with vulnerability and surrender, this can really play an integral role and heighten some of this connection between the two people inside of the dynamic. Engage in this type of scene can really invoke a strong range of emotions. For some, it invokes arousal or shame. It can heighten trust. It can lessen trust. It can even involve personal growth. It's really crucial for us to understand that consent and communication and respect for the boundaries form the foundation of any BDSM activity that we all participate in, including humiliation play. And within the context of BDSM, humiliation is not just about causing harm or belittling someone without their consent. And I've talked about harm before, and there's a big separation, and I've actually written about where I've discussed the difference between hurt and harm. For many sadists out there, people who are involved in impact play, they look to hurt their partners because that's part of the point, right? We never look to harm our partners because there is a big difference between hurt and harm. Hurt will be consensual and respected and even fun or engaging or erotic. Harm leaves lasting emotional implications and effects. And that kind of ties in with humiliation and degradation. We don't want to do something where we're emotionally or psychologically beating someone down so much that they can't recover. So we're never looking to harm somebody inside of this play, especially without their consent, right? So we're going to discuss the scene beforehand and really kind of start to get an idea of what's going on. So within the context of all of this transpiring, we have to understand that this needs to be carefully negotiated, that the consensual exploration of the psychological and emotional dynamics that are going to transpire in that scene are going to be powerful and long-lasting. Partners may not be able to recover fast from a very intense humiliation or degradation scene. Sometimes some of these scenes can involve things like water sports, so you might do them in an area if you're at a dungeon where there's showers and you might be urinating on someone while you're talking down to them. During interrogation scenes, humiliation, talking about what kind of trash they are or such a shitty person and so on and so forth, and they can get quite intense. I really enjoy interrogation scenes because the psychological aspect of trying to find out what the secret or whatever maybe the object that the person is holding on to, that I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm using these techniques to kind of break them emotionally and psychologically. So the goal for us inside of these experiences is to create this shared experience between the two people that does push these boundaries, and it challenges the perceptions of self while maintaining the emotional well-being of each person involved inside of the play itself. And that's really what's kind of important here, because if we're not being concerned when we're involved with somebody else, when we're doing a scene with somebody else, I would never do a pickup scene, like a pickup interrogation or a pickup humiliation scene, because I may not know that somebody has suffered a trauma or may have intense feelings of shame or fear of rejection. So if I'm not really engaged or in tune with that person, this is probably not a scene I'm going to do with them. And that's really relevant here. I think a lot of people get involved in these scenes that don't understand the full and long lasting ramifications emotionally that it's going to have on them for days or weeks later. In some cases, I've talked to people up to 3 or 4 months later, because it's those words tend to start echoing inside of their own mind. So with that, I kind of want to start talking about some of the psychological aspects of humiliation and really kind of get a little bit deeper inside of the psychological dynamics of humiliation play. Now, by challenging one's sense of self and embracing this vulnerability, embracing our own erotic exploration, humiliation scenes can provide a unique exploration of power dynamics within the consensual context itself. Now, the dominant here, in this example, I'll use myself, I'm exercising a lot of control. While my partner, my slave, she's willingly surrendering herself to me inside of this scene. And at this point, we forged a very deep sense of trust and intimacy. She knows after 9 years that I'm not going to harm her or cause her any lasting psychological or emotional pain that's unrecoverable, or that's going to have her seeking out therapy on the outside. But mentioning these things, it's really essential to establish clear communication, consent, effort, discussion, and construction of the scene, potentially if you need a safe word to call the scene off, to ensure the emotional well-being throughout the scene. I've even seen some dominants in my time where the scene, they got so overly invested in the scene themselves, they've called stop to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that'll be a discussion for what dominance and calling scenes off for another day. Now, it's important to recognize the complex emotions that can arise from humiliation play. Now, some of these may involve elements of embarrassment, shame. These scenes can elicit intense arousal, and they can provide the opportunity for growth and self-discovery about things that may be a cathartic release during the scene itself. Now, I'm not actively saying here at all that humiliation or other types of fetish or BDSM activities are a substitute for coping mechanisms or therapeutic practices inside of this world. They're not. And I've talked about that before. Now, there's people that are out there that are still trying to say that there's psychological benefit. There are psychological benefits to the lifestyle, but it's not a replacement and it's not a therapeutic practice. And I want to state that because it's really important. I've seen too many people and people I know or have become acquaintance with, and they'll talk about this, and they're talking about it from the Dr. Google armchair thing, and I have years and years of education and research and practice behind me, and the things they're saying are just completely wrong. So you don't want to take this in there if you're suffering emotional trauma from family or bad breakups and then try to go into a scene as a cure. That's not going to work. It's going to cause further harm. And I want to digress too much here. Now, the open and honest communication between the two partners is vital to navigate these psychological dynamics. And we have to ensure that everyone involved feels safe, understood. They need to feel heard and supported. They need to know there is a start and a stop time to this, that it's never going to be personal, that the attacks aren't going to be personal. You're not going to talk about someone's nose or, how their parents are shitty people or that they were never popular in school. Now, you may have negotiated a scene where you're doing role play, so you're maybe, a teacher and student, And there's always going to be some exceptions in here. These aren't hard and steadfast rules, but you have to understand what may or may not cause a regression inside of somebody, and especially an emotional regression. And you might be asking me, well, what the hell's a regression? Well, you've often heard the term triggers, right? And then they set somebody into it. A regression is when we go back to that memory inside of ourselves emotionally, and then we're reliving that experience, especially if it's quite painful. And so people have tended to call these triggers, it's actually a wrong word for it. It's really a regression. And so we have to be able to really negotiate and maintain everybody's state of mind and their well-being while we're engaging in these activities, especially something as heavy as this. And the more trust and intimacy you have with the partner, the deeper you can probably go, because you're going to understand what areas you can push and what areas you can't go into, or what areas they're not ready to go into. So there's kind of, and I'm sure there's more areas to explore there, but there's at least that's kind of a starting point for you when you're getting engaged in this type of topic. So now that I'm talking about negotiation here, negotiating our boundaries and managing emotional well-being are some of the critical aspects of engaging in this type of healthy play, right? And this isn't for everyone. There's a lot of people who don't want to be degraded, or, where it's typically like slut or bitch, or if you're submissive as a female, or if it's a male, then calling them worthless or a scumbag or any of the other things you might call them, right? We have to understand that we really have to be clear when we're doing this type of thing, that it's not coming from a malicious place. Inside of the scene, you may be acting like that, and that's fine, but this types of scene tend to have a lot more build out than going, hey, kitten, we're going to be doing a humiliation scene this weekend, and I'll just tell you about it when we get there. You can't do that, because they're not going to be mentally or emotionally ready for what's about to transpire. So clear communication here is the key to understanding what's going to be acceptable, what's going to be off limits within the scene. And by identifying these emotional regressions that may come up beforehand, partners can minimize the potential harm and create a space for exploration, erotic depths, and sensuality that arise from this type of play itself. Now, during the scene, ongoing communication becomes even more crucial, right? Because we're already involved in the degradation part. So on occasion, you may have built in for yourself as the dominant check-ins, which allows for moments of adjustments. And the key point here is that this ensures that both of you remain emotionally connected and supported throughout the scene experience. You're not detracting from the scene just because you're checking in on them to make sure that if you've got them crying or they're screaming out and writhing in pain. I'm a sadist, so that's what we do during these interrogation and humiliation scenes, that you're letting them know you're still connected to them, that this isn't become personal or an incessant attack just for the need because they're being vulnerable and you want to exploit that. So really kind of maybe your first check-in is 10 minutes within the scene, and if you know the scene's going to go for like an hour, then you're going to check in maybe midway and then towards the end. And when we're done, we move into that phase of aftercare, and we understand that we know it's about providing emotional support and reassurance after the scene. And this is such a significant part to the healing process once these complex emotions arise. Or if they arise, they may not arise. But we have to, this time, when we're in the aftercare phase, especially from a humiliation scene, we have to get to the point where we are going ahead and discussing some of these things and reassuring our partner, it wasn't personal, this was part of the scene and we're kind of going through and reassuring them to let them know we truly do care. That we're not just letting them hang out on their own and be unsupported. And that's kind of the bigger thing. And through this process, it helps facilitate the reestablishment of the emotional connection and our stability within the relationship dynamic itself. And it promotes the overall well-being of not just the submissive here and not just the slave, but it also promotes the well-being and the stability of the dominant themselves, because that's going to be hard if we're not used to, especially if you've never done a humiliation scene. It can be quite taxing on a dominant because they're not going to understand the first time they do it that doesn't feel personal, that it's not just a scene that we're involved in. And that's where that gets a little bit tricky, right? And these are the things that we have to take into account. And sometimes dominants don't really understand. And that's where we need to start paying attention to ourselves. Because if you are yelling at someone or talking down to someone, you can take on feelings and emotions as the dominant that they may not understand. You feel bad. And you know it's not personal because we're not saying anything here to intentionally harm somebody, right? We're inflicting this verbal humiliation, or maybe a mix of verbal and physical humiliation, so we can really get into our BDSM dynamic, to take it deeper, to take it to that next level for ourselves, right? And that's really a major part to all of this. So we have to make sure, sorry, something caught my attention for a moment, so I lost my train of thought. We have to make sure towards the end, everybody's okay. So dominance, while you're looking after your submissives, you need to look after yourself as well. You need to do check-ins with yourself. And even a couple of days after. Okay? And these types of scenes can be fun. They can be intense. And I often recommend for a lot of people, you may want to think about the type of scene you're going to do and that you want to do. If you're going to do interrogation with humiliation, or a shower scene with water sports and humiliation, you might want to start playing it out in your mind so you have a little bit of a pattern to follow. And it's not so much a psychological or emotional shock to the system once you start saying it. Because if you're not used to humiliating someone, it can sound off. It's going to take you outside of yourself. You're not going to be really responding. Now, I've done it enough where the words begin to flow. You get inside of your role. You feel your power grow. You feel that inner dominance as you're chastising someone below you. And you're really starting to enjoy the scene. And they are as well, because your partner is going to feed off of your energy. So really, when you do these scenes, put forth a lot of effort and thought into thinking about how you want to do this and how it's going to look like, and take in their emotional states into account, your emotional states into account, and how you're going to transition to each phase of this scene. So finally, I kind of want to leave you with really reflecting on the psychological aspects of this type of play. It really truly is crucial for us to approach this fetish with an understanding of consent and communication, really driving home the emotional well-being, to understand that each individual's boundaries and comfort levels have to be respected, looked after, and cared for. And that goes for both parties. And we have to make sure that this is consensual, right? Because we're not going to just be exploring power dynamics just because one person's in charge. It doesn't work that way. Relationships are a two-way street, right? You may want to reach out to and find guidance from somebody, a dominant that's involved in this type of play, that can really guide you through your first scene. Maybe tell you some of their do's and don'ts of what they've done. So looking for a mentor may be quite helpful. and ask how they dealt with the scene, how they built the scene, maybe how they even dealt with the aftercare after the scene ended, right? Because if we're not being empathetic and if we're not being completely thoughtful about how we're engaging inside of the community itself, we are going to have a lot of problems because we're not putting forth the effort that the lifestyle requires. And we're going to end up letting down our partners and ourselves when the scene doesn't go completely the way we want it or goes completely wrong. Right? So I want to leave you today with a couple of questions to think about this. I'm going to post these questions on my social media once I post this thing up. The first is, how do you approach negotiating boundaries and consent when engaging in humiliation play with your partner that you know are going to involve intense psychological dynamics? And second, what are some of the ways you prioritize the emotional well-being and aftercare in your BDSM experiences, particularly when you engage in activities that may invoke intense psychological or emotional feelings like humiliation? And I think these questions are really relevant when we're talking about this today. So have a think, take a listen. If you're listening to me on Spotify through the app, please rate me 5 stars so other people can find me. Let me know what you think about these questions. My book is currently now going through its second revision. It's still for sale, but if you do give it some time, it'll be revised a little bit better, so it'll be more ease of movement, reading through it. It's a learning process for me. So I hope you all have a great week. And until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.